Greetings all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another top 10 video. Today we're going to be switching up the format a little bit, and we're not going to be talking about movies. Instead, we're going to be talking about what is probably one of the most iconic science fiction series ever created, Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'm someone who has become a Star Trek fan in more recent years. It was something that I never personally grew up with, but I have since become a very big fan of the series, and it was really this series in particular, Star Trek: The Next Generation, that really made me a fan and understand what is special about Star Trek and the kinds of stories that Star Trek can do really well. And with that, as somebody who's now, watched the entire series twice over, I thought that instead of doing a normal retrospective, I would do a top 10 video because of course this series is something that has been covered a lot in the past. So instead I decided to do a top 10 video counting down my personal top 10 favorite episodes. And like I always point out, it's important to remember that this is just my personal list of top 10 favorite episodes. So at number 10, we have Relics. This one follows the Enterprise stumbling upon a Dyson sphere, with a ship crashed on the outer surface. An away team finds some systems still powered up and the chief engineer from the old Enterprise locked in the transporter cycle. So what's awesome about this one is of course they bring back James Doohan, or Scotty as of course he was most commonly known as, and so getting to see this character come back, I'm pretty sure for the last time, considering that this was 1992, which was 1 year after the last film with the original crew, which of course was Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. So getting to see him come back one last time and interact with the Next Generation characters was a lot of fun. One of the absolute highlight moments is of course when he goes into the holodeck, and of course they recreate the set or the ship of course of the original Enterprise. Always really amazing in the show, the type of sets that they would create just for the holodeck alone. It was really definitely a big highlight of the show. And yeah, so this is just definitely a fun one, and it was great to see James Doohan as the character one last time interacting with the Next Generation characters. So that's Relics at number 10. At number 9, we have Cause and Effect. This one follows the Enterprise getting caught up in a time loop, which always has one result: total destruction of the ship itself. This is just I think a prime example of the kinds of stories that Star Trek does well, particularly that was done well in the Next Generation. I really think that the show was at its height when it would do stories like this. These sort of, it comes up with this interesting setup and you don't know exactly what's going on or why it's happening, and the rest of the episode is all about the intrigue of trying to find out why is this happening, what is happening, what is that other ship, who is on that other ship, why is no matter what we do does it keep happening, and why is there a time loop in the first place. And it's just a really great, this episode just does a great job of kind of building the tension, building the suspense. So that's Cause and Effect at number 9. At number 8, we have Future Imperfect. This one follows Riker awakening from a 16-year absence after an away mission where he contracted a disease which destroyed his memory back to the point of infection, or so he is told. Another episode that, sets up a really great mystery where, suddenly, Riker kind of wakes up and he discovers that supposedly 16 years of his life has passed. I just really love, the idea of this one, the idea of, what would happen if you just, you went to sleep and then all of a sudden you woke up and 16 years had passed, and that at least that was what people were telling you, and you find that, the world around you has changed and that you yourself have changed, and people are telling you all these things that you've done that you don't remember doing. It's a really interesting episode because when you're watching it, you know that, okay, well, there's no way that 16 years could have actually passed it, but at the same time, it's interesting seeing, all these different things, the setup of where things are and where things could go with the future of the series and the characters, that it just really makes for an interesting episode. This was definitely a fun one because you can kind of see that something is not right, and when you're watching it, you're not quite sure what you're missing, but that there's something is going on, and things are not quite the way that they appear to be. It's a really great one. I really like it a lot. So that's Future Imperfect at number 8. Number 7, we have Frame of Mind, another episode focusing on Riker questioning the reality around him as he finds himself waking up in an alien asylum and faces the prospect of his life on the Enterprise has been a complete delusion, following Riker and him questioning, the world around him, and of course it flashing back between him being in the asylum and him being on the Enterprise. And of course it's just this insane thing of him trying to figure out what is reality, what is not reality. And of course it's just a really, 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 really fun one, again, of just trying to understand what is happening, why is this happening. But what really makes this episode great to me is Jonathan Frakes' performance. Honestly, his performance in this I think is the best of the entire series, and I really think it's what makes this episode fantastic. And it's one of those episodes that's really creepy, slightly a bit more of a darker episode. It's very creepy, it's very suspenseful, and definitely my kind of Star Trek episode. So that's Frame of Mind at number 7. At number 6, we have Lower Decks. This episode follows a mission that is seen through the eyes of some of the junior officers who are up for promotions on the Enterprise. This episode is definitely one of the fan favorite episodes of the series, and it's a really, really interesting take that they go with this episode, because obviously in all the Star Trek shows, not just this one, we always follow just the initial sort of main crew of characters, but of course on the ship or on the Enterprise there's always all these other crew members that we never really interact with that much or get to really see things from their perspective. So Lower Decks just completely goes against that and takes us in a completely different direction and shows us a completely different perspective from these other characters who we've never met before. And honestly, on paper, it kind of sounds like it shouldn't really work because they're trying to make us see our beloved main characters in a way that we don't see them, or at least, from following the series through their eyes, that we don't see them. This episode I really feel like was kind of a gamble, but somehow it really, really worked, and it was really just interesting to see how our main characters could kind of look through the eyes of other members of the crew. And they did a really great job making you kind of like all these new characters very quickly. And it was just interesting to see things through a different perspective. It's an absolutely intriguing episode, and it really, really showed how they were not afraid to kind of step out of the boundaries of what they had established to tell an interesting story. So that's Lower Decks at number 6. We have Parallels. This one follows Worf finding himself shifting between realities where events and details are in a constant state of flux, and only he seems to be aware of the changes. Another episode that plays with reality bending issues and whatnot, and kind of questions why is this happening. You can tell that I really enjoy these types of episodes a lot. I mean, this is definitely kind of, I would say, of all the kinds of stories that Star Trek tells, I would say that this is probably my personal sort of type of story that they do. It's easily one of the best episodes, or at least episodes that deals with this kind of story that I think is on the show. Worf is definitely always been one of my favorite characters, and I really wanted to have at least 1 or 2 episodes of that focus on him on this list, because I enjoy all the Worf centric episodes. Start slow and it builds and builds and builds, and it really does a great job of you feeling like you're in Worf's shoes, kind of questioning, okay, what is reality, what is not reality. And again, it just does a great job of building and building and building until you get that awesome ending. And it's one of the best episodes for sure. So that's Parallels at number 5. At number 4, we have Iborg. I think I would be fried by other Star Trek fans if I didn't at least have some Borg-centric episodes on this list. It follows the Enterprise finding a lone Borg drone separate from the collective, and they bring him aboard. The drone itself then begins to assert his individuality, but his presence causes differing levels of fear and sympathy from the various members of this Enterprise crew. All of the Borg-centric episodes that are in Star Trek or in this series were always very, epic and big scale. But this one was sort of I thought was really interesting because it was a little bit more smaller scale, and it kind of took this kind of what I thought was a really interesting idea of taking what, we have established is, sort of this hive mind and severing one part of that. And this was really kind of the first kind of time that we really kind of saw that the Borg might be more human than perhaps they have previously been established to be, and it kind of showed that, well, maybe there is a way of possibly redeeming the Borg. It's a very interesting, I think, setup, and it makes for some really interesting debates on, just the series. And this is just, a fine example of, what Star Trek does really, really well, of bringing up questions like this, and, whether or not, you can trust this. And what's great is that, when you're watching this, is that you kind of find yourself as the viewer not really being sure what to think. You yourself find yourself kind of questioning things regardless of, what your initial opinion might be on how they should, go forward with the situation. But it was a really interesting episode, and I think it was really important because it really kind of opened the door for the types of stories that they could do with the Borg moving forward. So I think it's a great episode. So that's Iborg at number 4. At number 3, we have Yesterday's Enterprise. This one follows the Enterprise C entering the Enterprise D's timeline and the space continuum, where they find Picard and crew are in a constant state of war with the Klingons, and the only person that knows it is Guinan. In season 3 was definitely one of the best sort of earlier episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation that really showed, the promise of just how good this show could actually be. And I think season 3 was definitely a big turning point for the series, because honestly, I think the first 2 seasons, I think many fans would agree, are the weakest, because they were still trying to find their footing, I guess. And season 3 was what I think was really when the show kind of hit its stride, and then from that point on, pretty much almost every episode was either everywhere from great to fantastic. And then I think kind of a little bit later on, particularly in the last season, there was a few dead episodes here and there. But for the most part, this was kind of, season 3 was kind of the beginning of the show really being at full force and in full form and really kind of living up to its potential. And this was definitely one of the earlier episodes that really showed that. Definitely one of my favorites, because again, it's another one of those types of episodes where something is happening, reality is being melded, things are changing, and of course only one character knows it, and this time it's Guinan. And this one, what I think is so great about this is because you as the viewer watching this episode, you know that something is wrong, because this is not the way that things are being shown, is not what we know as to be the truth from the previous episodes. So the fact that Guinan, the only character that kind of really kind of knows that something is wrong, isn't even really sure, and isn't even really sure exactly what's happening, but they just know that something isn't quite right. They kind of kept Guinan's sort of abilities kind of a mystery, and they never really explained too much about Guinan's past and everything. And I just, I've always been a huge Whoopi Goldberg fan, and so obviously I just love the character of Guinan on the series, and it was always fun when she would show up in the show. And this was, I think, one of the best examples of them using that character to their best abilities. And it's just a really, really thrilling and great episode. But of course, one of the biggest highlights of this episode was because, it was an alternate timeline where things had played out differently. It gave them an opportunity to bring back Denise Crosby, Tasha Yar, who of course had been killed off towards the end of season 1 initially, because they initially felt that there was too many characters on the show. And so this was a really, really fun way of bringing back that character in a very Star Trek-y kind of way that I think really made it work well. And of course the character would end up popping up again many times. Fantastic episode, love it. So that's Yesterday's Enterprise at number 3. At number 2, don't worry, I do have some of the 2-parters on this list, and of course we've got to have what many consider to be one of the all-time greats, The Best of Both Worlds, Part 1 and 2. This one follows the Enterprise responding to a distress call on one of the Federation's outermost colonies, only to find a big hole in the ground where the town used to be and discover that the Borg are behind the attack. This 2-part episode, of course, was the infamous beginning of, you know, a long tradition in this series of each season ending with part 1 of a two-parter, and the next season being the first episode being part 2 of that two-parter. And this was just, you know, definitely I think probably the best episode that really heavily featured the Borg in the series. Picard, you know, then being absorbed by the collective, and everything that of course then transpired, and ending of course with part 1 with that awesome cliffhanger of Riker's order to fire, which I think pretty much everybody knows about, was just such a brilliant, iconic moment for the series, and really showed some real promise of, you know, and really kind of showed that, you know, no particular story is out of limits. That this show, it was definitely way more crazier than anything that we had seen on the show up till that point. And yeah, it's just an absolutely fantastic episode, and really showed that the Borg are a threat to fear. It really was, you know, a really major event in the series, and is definitely one of the best episodes for sure. So that's the Best of Both Worlds part 1 and 2 at number 2. And at number 1 we have All Good Things part 1 and 2, the two-part series finale. This one of course follows Picard finding himself shifting past the present and the future, and must use that to just try to discover a threat to humanity's existence. Obviously, it being the type of episode that it is should not surprise you that I put it at number 1, but I legitimately think that this is probably one of the best finales to any show ever made. I mean, this really was Star Trek going out on top with this episode. Fantastic episode that really showed, again, my personal favorite type of storylines where, you know, reality is being bent, you know, only one character knows it, and this time of course it being, you know, Picard himself, and the idea of, you know, him constantly shifting in between the different timelines, and him not really knowing you know, which timeline is real and what is not real, I think kind of translates to you the viewer, because when you're watching this, because this is the final 2 episodes, you yourself aren't really sure, okay, what timeline is Picard actually in as of this moment? And it's really interesting, you know, again, going back to the past, and I love the detail of them having, you know, the old suits on and everything, and then also going into the future and seeing, you know, where so many of our beloved characters show up. A wonderful celebration of the series, and it's, you know, again, a story that Star Trek does incredibly well. And when I was putting this list together, I knew that this was going to be, you know, number 1 on the list, because I just absolutely love stories like this. I definitely think that this is, you know, the best that this series had to offer when it came to stories like this. Pretty much a perfect ending to the series that, you know, also kind of left things open for the future with the characters as well. And yeah, it's just absolutely fantastic episode. One of my all-time favorite finales ever. So that's All Good Things part 1 and 2 at number 1. So there you go, guys, that was my top 10 personal favorite episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. Be sure to jump in the comments down below and let me know what your personal top 10 all-time favorite episodes of the show are. So thanks for watching, and until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible, and I will see you in the next video.